The night the heir of the Aurelian Empire nearly died began with music. Lyra stood beneath a ceiling of suspended starlight, tiny drones projecting constellations that shifted according to the mood of the crowd. Diplomats drifted through the grand atrium in fabrics woven from living silk, their conversations layered with subtle telepathic harmonics. Lyra heard it all. Her long ears tilted slightly, catching the ultrasonic murmurs woven beneath polite laughter. She smiled the way she had been trained to smile, serene, unbothered, unassailable. "Your Highness," said Counselor Heir, bowing just low enough to be respectful but not so low as to suggest loyalty. "You look radiant." "I am illuminated by 3 moons and 47 projection units," Lyra replied calmly. "Radiance is statistically inevitable." Heir blinked, of course. She moved on before he could measure whether she had insulted him. The alliance with Earth had been announced only weeks ago. Human soldiers now occupied a secured diplomatic wing below the palace, temporary guardians, temporary allies, temporary trust. Lyra had argued in favor of the alliance. Her mother had agreed, the council had pretended to. A flicker rippled through the ceiling stars. Lyra's ears twitched. The music stuttered just half a note off. To most, it would sound like nothing. To her, it was a scream clearing its throat. She turned slowly. Across the atrium, a serving drone rotated 90 degrees too precisely. Its optic lens glowed a shade too bright. "Excuse me," Lyra murmured to no one in particular. The first plasma shot shattered the projection grid above her. Screams followed, this time audible to everyone. Royal guards surged forward, energy shields unfolding like translucent wings. Lyra did not freeze. She pivoted, calculating exits, mapping trajectories in the augmented overlay pulsing behind her eyes. A second shot disintegrated the column where she had stood moments earlier. "Well," she muttered, lifting her ceremonial skirts slightly, "this is inconvenient." "Your Highness," Captain Arden reached for her arm, the floor detonated, not outward, downward. Lyra vanished through a maintenance aperture she did not know existed. She fell, not gracefully, not strategically, but with a very undignified yelp, into darkness. She landed in a transit shaft cushioned by cargo netting and old insulation foam. The air smelled like ozone and dust. Above, muffled chaos. Below, silence. Lyra lay still for 3 seconds, then 4. "I meant to do that," she whispered to the empty shaft. Her neural implant flickered with emergency signals. Assassins inside the capital. Multiple signatures. Palace security compromised. Someone had planned this well. She pulled herself upright and brushed debris from her shoulders. One of her long ears throbbed slightly. She adjusted the cartilage with practiced fingers. No blood. Good. A narrow maintenance corridor stretched ahead, lit by intermittent strips of pale blue light. She began walking. Each step downward carried her further from the throne room she had known all her life. The air grew colder. The architecture shifted from living crystal to reinforced alloy. Diplomatic sector. Human territory. Lyra hesitated. Her mother's voice echoed in memory, trust cautiously, rule decisively. Another tremor shuddered through the structure. Somewhere above, something exploded with enough force to vibrate the corridor walls. "Decisively, then," she muttered. She followed the corridor until it ended at a junction of sealed doors marked with Terran script. Her implant translated automatically. Residential quarters, Alliance personnel. Footsteps echoed faintly behind her. Not guards. Too synchronized? Lyra's pulse accelerated. She approached the nearest door and pressed her palm to the access panel. Denied. She pressed again, harder, as if authority alone might override foreign technology. Denied. The footsteps grew closer. "Oh, for the love of diplomacy," she hissed. She curled her hand into a fist and knocked, once, twice. A pause, the door slid open with a quiet hydraulic sigh. A human stood there wearing a gray military undershirt and holding a metal cup that smelled aggressively bitter. He stared at her. She stared at him. For a moment, neither spoke. His gaze flicked to her glowing royal sigils, then to her long ears, which were currently angled backward in irritation. "You're not maintenance," he said carefully. "Brilliant deduction," Lyra replied. "May I come in before I am vaporized?" He leaned slightly to the side, glancing down the corridor. The synchronized footsteps rounded the far corner. His eyes widened. "Yep," he said. "That seems like a vaporization situation." He grabbed her wrist, not roughly but decisively, and pulled her inside. The door sealed shut just as plasma fire scorched the hallway. Silence. The human released her slowly. They stood in a modest room cluttered with data pads, boots, and a half-disassembled cleaning drone. Lyra inhaled. The air carried traces of metal polish and something roasted. The human lifted his cup. "Coffee," he explained. "It helps with existential dread." She blinked. "Do you experience that often?" He considered. "Tuesdays." A faint explosion rattled the walls. He set the cup down carefully. "Okay, I'm going to assume you're important." "I am the heir to the Aurelian throne." He nodded once. "Of course you are." "You do not seem surprised." "Princess," he said gently. "A glowing alien royal just knocked on my door during a palace attack." Surprise was about 3 disasters ago. Despite herself, Lyra let out a short breath that might have been a laugh. Outside, heavy boots pounded past the door. Inside, a human soldier and the future ruler of an empire stood in uncertain alliance. "My name is Sergeant Ethan Vale," he said. Lyra straightened, regaining composure. "Lyra of House Aurelian." He glanced at the door, then back at her. "Well, Lyra of House Aurelian, you've officially interrupted my very quiet evening." She lifted her chin. "You are welcome." Another blast shook the corridor. Ethan moved to dim the room's lights. "Guess we're having company." Lyra's ears angled forward again, catching distant whispers of hostile comm signals. "Yes," she said softly, "we are." Ethan turned off the main lights and the room shifted into low-power mode, walls dimming to a muted blue. Outside, armored boots thundered past his door. Lyra stood perfectly still, her long ears angled forward, catching frequencies he couldn't even imagine. "They're scanning for biosignatures," she whispered. "Good," Ethan replied under his breath, "because mine's currently screaming." She shot him a look. "Control it." "I'm trying, it's being dramatic." A thin red beam slid beneath the crack of the door, sweeping across the floor. Ethan stepped casually in front of Lyra, as if blocking line of sight might somehow help against advanced alien assassins. She noticed. "That is unnecessary," she said quietly. "Probably," he agreed, "still doing it." The beam passed. Footsteps continued down the corridor. Neither of them moved for several seconds. Then Ethan exhaled slowly. "Okay, step 1. You explain why someone just tried to turn the royal palace into a fireworks show." Lyra folded her hands behind her back, reclaiming her posture despite the circumstances. "Succession tension. The council fears my reforms. I intend to redistribute military authority, expand civilian oversight, strengthen interspecies cooperation." He blinked. "Ah, so you're dangerous." "To outdated power structures, yes." "Yeah," he nodded. "They hate that." She glanced at the door. "They will not stop." He crossed to a wall panel and activated a localized signal jammer. "Good news. This room now looks like a boring pocket of electromagnetic nonsense. Bad news. If my commanding officer tries to call, I'm technically committing mild treason." Lyra tilted her head. "You are willing to risk that?" He shrugged. "Princess, if I report you right now, best case scenario I get buried in paperwork. Worst case, you get handed back to whoever just tried to vaporize you. I hate paperwork." A flicker of reluctant amusement crossed her face. "You are unusually calm." "Oh, I'm not calm," he said cheerfully. "I'm catastrophizing internally at record speed." A distant explosion rippled through the structure. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Lyra closed her eyes briefly, accessing palace security channels through her implant. Static, corrupted feeds. Internal sabotage confirmed. "They have compromised the upper levels," she said quietly. "My mother is secure for now, but the council chambers are locked down." Ethan's expression shifted, humor thinning, but not disappearing. "So the assassins are organized?" "Yes, and you fell through a maintenance shaft." Her eyes narrowed. "I adapted to evolving circumstances." "You tripped." "It was a calculated descent." "Into trash foam." She lifted her chin. "It cushioned my landing." He studied her for a second, then nodded solemnly. "Strategic trash foam." Despite the chaos, she laughed again, soft, startled, real. The room trembled. Ethan moved to his locker and pulled out a compact pulse rifle, checking its charge level. He hesitated, then handed Lyra a smaller sidearm. She stared at it. "I am trained in ceremonial combat," she said. "This one's less ceremonial," he replied. "Point at the glowing bad guys." Her long ears twitched in irritation, but she accepted it. Another scan beam passed the door, slower this time. "They suspect this sector," she murmured. "Yeah," Ethan agreed. "Turns out harboring runaway royalty isn't subtle." She turned toward him fully. "You could still surrender me." He met her gaze. For the first time, the humor faded into something steadier. "They're trying to kill you," he said. "I don't hand people back to killers." Silence settled between them, not awkward, but weighted. Her implant pulsed with a new alert. Encrypted signal, council frequency, she accessed it. A familiar voice filtered through, distorted but recognizable. "Lyra," said Counselor Heir, "return peacefully. This misunderstanding need not escalate." Ethan raised an eyebrow. Ah, the classic misunderstanding assassination. Lyra's jaw tightened. "You authorized this." "A pause for the stability of the Empire," Heir replied. "For control," she countered. "Return and your death will be dignified." Ethan mouthed silently. "Wow," Lyra cut the transmission. Her long ears angled back, not in fear, but in anger. "They are no longer subtle," she said. "Neither should we be," Ethan replied. He tapped his wrist console, pulling up a map of the diplomatic wing. "There's a service lift at the end of this corridor. It connects to the Council's secondary access hall. Not monitored heavily because humans are apparently considered too unsophisticated to use it creatively." Lyra's eyes gleamed. "How fortunate." "Yeah," he said, "we're full of surprises." Another explosion rocked the hallway. The door shuddered under impact. "They've narrowed it down," he muttered. Lyra stepped closer to him. "If we are captured, they will accuse you of collusion." "Already assumed that. You could be executed." He paused, then offered a small grin. "Guess I picked the wrong night to drink decaf." The door buckled. Ethan grabbed his rifle. "Okay. Strategic trash foam, Princess. Time to move." She almost corrected him, almost. Instead, she straightened, weapon in hand. "You stand with me knowing the consequences," she said quietly. He met her eyes again, steady, grounded. "Yeah," he said, "I do." The door began to melt under concentrated plasma. Lyra felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not fear, not duty, trust. "Very well, Sergeant Vale," she said. "Let us inconvenience the Council." He grinned. "Now that sounds like a plan." The door burst inward in a flash of light. And they ran. They ran through smoke and flashing emergency glyphs, the corridor warping with heat behind them. Ethan fired controlled bursts over his shoulder, not to hit, just to discourage. Lyra kept pace beside him, long ears angled forward, filtering hostile comm signals and relaying them in clipped whispers. 3 ahead at the junction. 2 above in the vent grid. "Of course there are," Ethan muttered. "Why would there not be sealing assassins?" They skidded around the corner. Lyra didn't hesitate this time. She raised the pulse sidearm and fired with precise economy, not ceremonial, not elegant, effective. One attacker's weapon shorted out. Another stumbled back under the force of the blast. Ethan glanced at her mid-stride. "Look at you, strategically not tripping." "I am adapting," she replied coolly, though a faint spark of satisfaction flickered in her eyes. They reached the service lift. Ethan slammed his palm to the panel. "Authorization required," the system droned. Lyra stepped forward, pressing her hand beside his. Her royal sigils flared brighter beneath her skin, interfacing directly with the palace grid. "Override," she commanded. "Authorization recognized, air access granted." The doors opened. They stepped inside just as plasma scorched the hallway where they'd stood. As the lift ascended, silence settled, thick, charged. "You didn't hesitate," Ethan said quietly. "I have hesitated my entire life," Lyra answered. "Tonight I will not." The lift doors parted into the secondary access hall, outside the Grand Council chamber. The vast circular doors were sealed, energy fields humming. Inside, raised voices echoed. Lyra inhaled once, steadying herself. "You don't have to go in alone," Ethan said. She looked at him, really looked at him. Hours ago, she had seen a human soldier in wrinkled clothing holding a cup of something aggressively bitter. Now she saw a man who had stood between her and annihilation without flinching. "I will not," she said. "You will stand beside me." He exhaled slowly. "Okay, but if someone starts monologuing, I reserve the right to roll my eyes." She almost smiled. "Granted." She stepped forward and pressed her palm to the chamber interface. The doors split open. Counselors turned, expressions ranging from shock to calculation. Counselor Heir stood at the center dais, composed but pale. "Princess," he began smoothly, "you appear unharmed." "I am," she said, her voice carrying without amplification. "Your attempt was inefficient." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Ethan leaned slightly toward her. "That was a nice line." "Thank you." Lyra stepped forward into the circle of light. Her long ears stood tall, not in fear now, but in command. "You claim stability," she continued. You speak of preserving tradition, yet you authorized violence within our own capital. For the empire, Heir insisted. For control, she corrected calmly. You feared reform, you feared cooperation with humans, you feared losing exclusive authority. She gestured subtly. Ethan activated the recording feed from his wrist console. Encrypted transmissions filled the chamber, Heir's voice negotiating the assassination parameters. Silence followed, Heir's composure cracked. The alliance weakens us. Lyra did not raise her voice. She did not lash out. Instead, she stepped fully into her role. No, she said. Isolation weakens us, arrogance weakens us, fear weakens us. She glanced once at Ethan. Trust strengthens us. Security forces entered quietly, surrounding the dais. This time they were loyal. Heir was detained without spectacle. The chamber remained silent long after he was taken away. Lyra faced the council. I will not rule through fear, she said, nor will I tolerate it. The alliance stands. Reform proceeds. If you oppose it, do so openly, not from shadows. No one spoke. The balance had shifted. Hours later, the palace stood quiet beneath the three moons again. Damaged crews repaired scorched walls. The projection drones resumed their artificial constellations. Lyra stood on a balcony overlooking the capital. Ethan joined her, still in slightly singed uniform. So, he said, that escalated. She exhaled softly. Yes. You handled it. I did not fall through any floors this time. He smiled, proud of you. She studied the city lights below. All my life I was prepared to inherit power. Tonight I learned to choose it. He didn't respond immediately. You changed, he said finally. So did you. Yeah, I didn't plan on being attached to galactic politics. You are, she said gently. Your actions will be recorded in our history. He grimaced lightly. Please tell them I looked heroic. I will tell them you complained about sealing assassins. That too. A comfortable silence settled between them. Sergeant Vale, she said after a moment, you could return to your command. No one would fault you. He looked out over the alien skyline, at ships gliding between towers, at a world that hours ago had tried to kill its own future. Yeah, he said slowly, but I think I'd rather see what happens next. She turned toward him fully. What happens next, she said, is rebuilding trust between councils, between species. And between people? He asked, her ears angled slightly thoughtful. Yes, she said, between people. Below them, the capital pulsed with renewed stability, not perfect, not invulnerable, but steadier. Lyra no longer felt like a figure waiting to inherit a throne. She felt like someone who had stepped into it. Not because it was given, because she had chosen to stand. Ethan leaned against the railing. So, Your Highness. Yes, next time you knock on my door, can it be for something less explosive? She allowed herself a full, unguarded smile. I will consider it, she said. And beneath three watching moons, the future of an empire quietly began again.